Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to myself and Fiorella again. We're going to try not to totally depress you, but we are going to basically unpack a lot of what is going on and some of the kind of subliminal messaging, particularly within the diplomatic corps of the various countries that are now being brought together into a much wider arena of war with the aggression against Iran that started back in right at the end of February. And with that in mind, we are going to start off with the UN Security Council resolution that was passed. It was tabled by Bahrain. It was, however, co-sponsored by, I think it was 35 countries, including India. India, of course, who has recently, Prime Minister Modi has recently visited Israel and has been seen hugging Netanyahu and is benefiting from a strategic military partnership with Israel, including technology sharing, which is something, according to many analysts in Iran, has not been provided, particularly by Russia, for Iran itself, actual technology sharing. Russia is sharing some of its technology with India. So it's kind of interesting for me that India is being put to the top of the pile by both Israel and Russia to some degree as regards military strategic technology sharing. And that's something even that Israel has been very backward on providing even to the US. So very interesting scenario. So India was one of the co-sponsors of the resolution, which effectively, of course, condemns Iran for allegedly targeting civilian infrastructure and civilians in the Zionist Arab Persian Gulf states. Sorry, that sounds like a mouthful, but it is the Persian Gulf. The Arab states in the Gulf are very much aligned with the Zionist entity and were created by Britain in order to provide this role of protectionism and apologism for the Zionist entity when it was created by the British, alongside the Rothschilds, of course, who are now behind the entire Epstein cabal, mentioned 12,000 times, I think, in the so far released Epstein documents. And then we had, perhaps not surprising for some of us, the abstention by Russia and China on this resolution. So effectively, very much as they did with the Trump peace scam resolution, reference Gaza, which did nothing to prevent the ongoing genocide. In a sense, it did give a green light because it brought the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the appropriation of Palestinian territory to a much larger and more extensive degree in the West Bank territories. Now around 83% of Area C is effectively going to come under the control of the Israeli government with their appropriation of lands there to the state. And then the state has the right to sell that land. And of course, they're certainly not going to be selling it to Palestinians. So I think if we start with this, that there has again been a huge division of opinion on social media. Many, in my opinion, quite rightly, have condemned it and said effectively what you're doing is saying that the enemies of Iran have the right to massacre 180 children in one school, to bomb hospitals, to bomb paramedics and ambulances, the same as they are doing right now in Lebanon, and of course what they've done in Palestine, particularly in Gaza, since October the 7th. But they've been doing this since they came into existence, raping women, murdering children, massacring civilians. And yet, for some reason, rather than oppose the language of the resolution, Russia and China chose to abstain again and air their protest at the resolution after it had actually passed, which is exactly what they did with the Trump peace scam resolution. And I think more worrying for me, and we can talk a bit more about this, is what this abstention then led to, particularly on the side of Russia. And I think One of the arguments that I'm seeing all the time, and Fee, I'd like your opinion on this, and yes, we can go into Craig Mokaiba's opinion on it. But one of the arguments that is really starting to bug me is this idea of, why disturb the enemy while it's destroying itself? People are basically saying, well, why would Russia and China put their head above the parapet while the US and its Epstein alliance is effectively committing genocide in Gaza, committing genocide in the West Bank, committing genocide right now in Lebanon, destroyed Syria, has tried to and has effectively committed to a degree genocide in Yemen, if we talk about the deliberate targeting of one sector of society, destroyed Iraq. So, in other words, how I read this is Russia and China are perfectly happy to sit on the sideline eating popcorn and waiting for the US to destroy itself, while endless massacres, bloodshed, and genocide are conducted by the US and Israel. And China is effectively increasing its investment in Israel and its collaboration, not only with Israel, but also with the Zionist Arab bloc, which includes predominantly the UAE. China is one of its leading trade partners and cooperation agents in the Middle Eastern region. So, Fee, if we can, if you want to bring back up Craig Mokaiba's statement, and if you just want to comment on that.
Yeah, so, for me, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to China and Russia, because it seems to me that they are allowed to withhold their veto and use it whenever they see fit. And you've outlined this countless times in reference to Syria, and in reference to other times when they have specifically done this. And the other thing that I want to mention about Craig's statement is this very thing is, this is, as you mentioned, the genocide that went on and is still continuing in Gaza by Israel in the United States. There was never any justifying, any sort of justice put on this entire thing. There was zero accountability held, and both China and Russia also abstained. This is not just a one-off thing. There's a history of abstaining or using their veto power when they decide. So it's not that, oh, they never get involved, which is the excuse we always get. Oh, they're just not getting involved. They don't like to interfere in other countries' affairs. No, but they do. And it is well documented.
Just very quickly, because the point on the vetoes, where they were perfectly happy between 2000 and 2023 to use them, particularly, as you said, in support of Syria. I think, I can't remember the exact numbers. I think Russia around 20 and China around 17. So in those 23 years. In 2024, they did veto Joe Biden's resolution on Gaza. And then suddenly, boom, 2025, and Trump comes into power, and we see Russia pivoting through Kirill Dmitriev, and one can say the fifth column and the Western-leaning protagonists within the Kremlin that obviously do have sway over President Putin. And we suddenly saw no vetoes on some of the most pressing situations and issues of our lifetime. One is the genocide in Gaza and further into Palestine. And the second one is this war of aggression against Iran. And on both cases, they didn't use veto. So what does that mean to me? That means they don't consider Iran important enough, and they don't consider Palestine important enough for them to use the veto. So sorry, I interrupted you there, but I think that's an important statistic for people to understand.
Well, yes. And the other thing I had a problem with was their statement in condemning Iran for attacking the Gulf, which is literally single-handedly, we know, working with Israel and the United States. So you can't use the excuse of, oh, but the Arab states supported this. You mean the vassal states of
exactly.
Israel and the Epstein empire, right? Like, you're talking about something that just doesn't fit. And so people use these excuses all the time. But what Craig says here is very important. You're only condemning Iran, but you're not talking about all of the actual facets of this, of who started it. And of course, China and Russia have mentioned that Israel and the United States attacked Iran and blah blah blah. But then by basically saying Iran should not have done what they were illegally allowed to do, which is defend themselves per international law, because they are also attacking in congruence with the United States and Israel. The Gulf states are. So what Iran is doing is legal under international law.
Well, and also they're defending Israel. They're defending Israel. And the other thing is that the military bases of the US and Israel are effectively put into heavily populated residential areas of those Gulf states, just as they are in Tel Aviv, by the way, right? The main intelligence and military centers are in residential areas of Tel Aviv. So none of this is actually discussed. And when Putin, because people are saying, oh, but Putin tabled another resolution and that was vetoed. Yeah, but Putin's resolution also did not identify the perpetrator. He didn't name Israel, right? And he was calling for a unilateral ceasefire. How does that work when one country is defending itself against an unlawful aggression by two nuclear states?
Let's just be clear. Putin didn't mention Israel by name, and that's the thing. That tells me everything we need to know. He's not going to do that. And people are trying to justify this. And it really like irritated me so much when this happened last week, like late in the week, I think, because I was like, wait, how do you justify? This isn't the first time, the second time. This is like a continuous pattern. And the thing is, another thing that was mentioned is the money, right? Because this isn't about Russia and China not agreeing with the whole premise of this issue itself, which is why they abstained. No, it's because of the money, especially for China. When you talk about its transactions and its economic relationship with the Gulf, it's all about the money. It's all about the oil as well. With Russia, not only the economic relationship with Israel, but also the desire to have a good relationship with the United States, especially as we've been seeing that as soon as this happened, the United States raised sanctions off of Russia. Hey, you're not going to tell me that this is just some sort of coincidence whatsoever.
There's a whole sequence actually leading up to that lifting of the sanctions, which again, I think is very important context to this discussion, right? I mean, you've had Putin effectively approving of Kirill Dmitriev's conversations and negotiations with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, both of whom are Zionists, both of whom are lifelong supporters of the Zionist entity. And we know Jared Kushner is looking at investment in waterfront estate and so on in Gaza once it is, in their view, ethnically cleansed fully. And the only Palestinians that remain, or those that are useful, can be kept in labor camps to run the Gaza free trade zone. But yeah, if we look at the fact that I think on the 25th of February, so 3 days before the aggression started against Iran, and Ayatollah Khamenei was assassinated by Israel, there were reports in Russian media and from the finance minister, whose name has escaped me right now. I think I do actually put it there. Salyonov, I think, saying that effectively the National Wealth Fund, the Fiscal Fund, the Budget Reserve were hemorrhaging cash because of the US sanctions on oil revenue, right? So this is a fact. They were losing huge amounts of money because of the restrictions on their oil revenue, and they were shifting money around. Analysts were saying basically the entire fund is going to be depleted by the end of the year if we don't do something serious. And I think that fiscal fund was something like 56 billion, right? So what they were doing was lowering the price above which there is a cutoff where funds are transferred into the National Wealth Fund. So they were lowering that in order to be able to transfer more money into the National Wealth Fund. So this was on the 25th of February. Suddenly we have on the, after the abstention at the UN, Kirill Dmitriev is dispatched to the United States. And then suddenly we have Peskov making statements saying, well, you know, the supply of oil globally, maintaining it with the closure of the Hormuz Straits is somewhere that we can overlap in our policy with the United States. Then suddenly Trump lifts sanctions temporarily, fair enough, but he lifts sanctions. Since then, Russia has been taking in 150 million per day, and that is going to increase as the Hormuz Strait remains closed. The Gulf states shut down exports. China has shut down exports. Venezuela, we know Trump basically took control of their oil industry in preparation for the war against Iran. But Russia is now effectively benefiting from the war against Iran. But how is it benefiting? It's benefiting from the sale of oil to the enemies of Iran, effectively the EU, and probably, to be fair, Israel, because Israel was buying oil from Kazakhstan, which is under control. The actual transport of the oil there is under control of Russia. So yes, people can say Russia, you know, played a good hand in this because they've now basically rescued their own national wealth fund, which, by the way, previously Kirill Dmitriev had organized for it to be basically bailed out by the Gulf states, predominantly Qatar. So that also, again, gives an indication of how important the Gulf states are to Russia to maintain its sovereign wealth fund, its national wealth fund, its revenue income, right? So for me, this is, and I'll come on to China shortly, because I have a number of statements from representatives of the Chinese government and from high-level academics in China who are very clearly saying what their policy will be going forward after the assassination of Imam Khamenei by Israel. They still perceive that they will maintain a pragmatic economic relationship with Israel.
What I want to highlight for people here is the things that I've been showing, in particular, the 1.3 to 1.9 billion dollars that Moscow has earned from the oil exports so far. So again, as Vanessa highlighted, this is also on selling oil to the enemies of Iran that are actually attacking it, combined with Israel and the United States. And this is why Russia didn't veto this. This is why they didn't use their veto, because they have an actual monetary advantage to this whole thing. And the way it's being presented by a lot of these, you know, pro-Russia or Russian paid or whatever commentary is the way that Russia is winning. Like, this is great. Look at what Russia did. They tricked the United States. Look, they're benefiting from this. And they also have a strategic alliance with Iran, which of course we have said for months now, since last year, that there is no defense pact with Iran for multiple reasons. Not just, you know, it's also Iran's choice. And the thing is, the reason is also because there isn't that trust, and that the desires that Russia would seek from Iran are also on the table. Iran is not, that people act like the statements made by the foreign minister are when they say that yes, we are strategic partners, is anything more than diplomacy. It's just talking about it's talking about cooperation. It is very much a generic statement. Russia makes the same ones, you know, China makes the same ones. This isn't anything I would say that is indicative of something actually substantial. You can't go off of these statements. And again, from Russia, these statements vary, and we'll go over the difference between, say, Lavrov and Kirill Dmitriev, who has not once mentioned, by the way, the death toll against Iran, who has never mentioned the violations of international law, never mentioned the school, has never mentioned anything the United States or Israel have done at all whatsoever, and has only talked about the prices of oil, which are surging. And yes, he's an economist, which makes sense. But at the same time, what we're showing here, combined with Kirill Dmitriev's focus, combined with the fact that Trump just told the world that Putin is ready to make a deal, but Zelensky's not ready to make a deal, combined with the fact that Stephen Witkoff, who is in charge of, with Jared Kushner, of fixing the Russia-Ukraine war, is also in charge of this war against Iran. That is not coincidental. The United States does not put people there, the same people, if they don't have a reason to. And also, at every single turn, Russia and China are pushed as mediators between the United States and Israel. And what they also attempt to do is to use them to sort of pivot towards the Gulf, try to get them to also find a happy medium with the Gulf. And this has been used continuously against Iran for a very long time, when we know, especially from WikiLeaks, and especially from pretty much history at this point, that the Gulf has been used as a way to isolate Iran and attack Iran. So we can't, in any sort of realistic way, take that as Russia and China are just mediators. No, they have an interest, a vested interest, in getting a ceasefire and getting an end to the war. Why the hell would Iran want to stop what they're doing when what they're doing is necessary to their survival? It is existential. And if you look at things that way, then you realize that China and Russia are being used to subdue Iran, that they're being used to try to pacify
Iran. To contain Iran, which is part of the path to Persia. Yes. And that's the whole point, is and also to make Iran dependent on them, because under the US sanctions, of course, China is the primary importer of Iranian oil. I think it's like 90%. But to a degree, I have heard that Iran is looking in the future to create a strategic independence. Iran doesn't want to be dependent upon either country. And that's why you see this diplomatic language. As a policy, Iran values its strategic independence because it's learned from its history what happens when it allies itself previously with Russia, the Soviet Union, and then again Russia. It has been let down. Putin didn't supply the S-300s because George Bush asked him not to in 2010. It's not only historic betrayals, the Soviet Union supplying weapons to Saddam Hussein, but it goes back way further than that. Russia has always coveted northern Iran, the Caspian Sea, and the warm water port there. That's throughout history, right? So Iran generally has a policy of retaining its strategic independence, which is why they didn't sign or didn't agree to the mutual defense clause, because Russia was effectively trying to pull them into the war in Ukraine to fight for Russia. And they said, no, look, we're fine supplying the drones and the technology. That's absolutely fine. But we don't want to get pulled into a defense of Russia in a war that actually we have nothing to do with, right? Which again would have been a policy that would potentially, I'm just thinking this, would have weakened Iran leading up to this final aggression against them, right? Potentially. And so I think from when you hear the language from the likes of the foreign minister Arakshi, it's diplomacy. He's not going to burn his bridges with China and Russia. China, at the end of the day, Iran is using, and I'll come back to this ridiculous idea that Russia is providing intelligence for Iran, right? Which was published, was it the Washington Post first of all, and then it was kind of picked up by CNN and a couple of others. Iran is using the China Beidou military satellite system. It basically transitioned from the public satellite system in 2025. Prior to that, it was just using the public system, which is very similar to GPS, from what I understand. I'm not a technical expert. It transitioned to the military access in 2025. And the Beidou system far outweighs the GLONASS, the Russian satellite system. The GLONASS system doesn't work well in Iran because of the mountainous terrain. The Beidou system gives huge advantages on surveillance, on signal jamming, on providing accurate information, even in the Iranian terrain, mountainous zones, and so on. It has huge advantages. So Iran, in my opinion, isn't even using the GLONASS system. It's not using GPS, it's using the Beidou military system. That's number one. So I don't really understand how on earth Russia is going to be able to provide intelligence anyway, and how could it provide intelligence which is superior to that which Iran is receiving through the Beidou satellite systems? Right? This doesn't make sense to me at all. Are there Russians on the ground in the Gulf states? And another point here, why on earth would Russia from 2015 until 2024 in Syria basically turn a blind eye in agreement with Israel and allow Israel to target Iranian personnel on the ground in Syria, leading to the bombing of the embassy in 2024, and now be providing information and intelligence to Iran to allow them to target Mossad assets and US military assets in the Gulf states and further afield? This makes no sense to me. Russia's alliance is with Israel, first and foremost, and we've discussed this many times. But I also kind of quickly want to come on to, I just pulled out some quotes just now before we came on, and I'm going to have to read them because I haven't memorized them. But the first two are from a couple of high-level academics in China who are talking about Israel-China relations after the assassination of Imam Ali Khamenei, right, on the 28th of February, on the first day of the war. So first of all, Chen Guangmeng, basically Israel and China will maintain political neutrality and economic pragmatism. China will not be drawn into the US-Iran confrontation. They don't even mention Israel in that. Another one, Lin Jing, China is unlikely to pivot to any side, and they will shift to a risk control prioritization. But then you even have, and this was back in January, the China special envoy on the Middle East, Zhai Jun, visited Israel and met many of the ministers within Netanyahu's government, including Gideon Saar, who has issued multiple genocidal statements in relation to Gaza and to the West Bank, to talk about and to discuss. So this was in January this year, mutually beneficial cooperation. And then the Israeli ambassador to China in the same month, but towards the end of the month, Eli Belot-Serkovsky, that's a very Semitic name, had his commentary published in the Chinese state news agency Xinhua, talking about the historical links between Jewish and Chinese civilizations, and also talking about developing even stronger socio-economic ties. None of this is mentioned, you know, when people are extolling the virtues of BRICS and extolling the virtues, well, basically China and Russia are winning the war, according to many of these people.
And that's one of the most enraging aspects, where they rob Iran of its agency and say this is all about getting to China. And I understand the geopolitical aspects of, after Iran, there's Russia, there's China. We know the United States is targeting, and that's specifically why this doesn't in the end, the way this is so economically frivolous for Iran and China will not benefit them in the long run. It may benefit them now in the short term, specifically even Russia, but in the long run, if you talk about how the United States and Israel, but the Epstein empire operates, they will not just stop at this. We're talking about capturing the entire world as a whole. So I understand where that comes from, but it's really Iran and Iranian lives that are the ones being lost, right? I wanted to point out a statement by that was done on March by the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson. I want to read that one because I think that one
before the abstention, or is this in relation to the abstention?
This is during. Yeah, this is during. So he said on the situation in Iran, right? He reached out to the relevant parties, communicated with his counterparts, called for peace to end the hostilities and de-escalation. Again, we're talking about peace. This isn't going to bring peace, okay? Like, it's very obvious, and they're not dumb. They know. So the foreign minister Wang Yi pointed out that this is a war that should not have happened. It is a war that does not do any good. Without the UN's authorization, the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran in the process of the ongoing U.S.-Iran negotiation, which clearly violates international law. Country sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity should be respected. China does not go along with the attacks against countries in the Gulf region. This is what I had an issue with, and condemns non-discriminatory attacks against civilians or non-military targets. The pressing priority now is to stop military operations once and prevent the conflict from spreading. The way out of the conflict is to return to dialogue and negotiation, as if that worked well the first 3 times. As soon as possible, and strive for restoration of peace. The fundamental solution is to jointly return to the right track of abiding by international law. Israel and the United States have never abided by international law and basic norms of international relations. So he says this basically in the video, which has subtitles, which is why I didn't play, because we'd have to read the subtitles. But what I'm saying is this is literally the problem. People posted this to me too, as if it's supposed to make the situation
this explains
better.
everything. Yeah.
It's like I actually have a problem with what they're saying.
I do, because you're basically saying you don't have the right to defend yourselves. The entire region, including the Palestinian resistance, has no right to defend itself, right? And who is indiscriminately targeting civilians, and who has the history of indiscriminately targeting civilians? Iran is not doing so. It never did so in True Promise 1, 2, 3. And it's not doing so in the Gulf states. But when the US and Israel are embedding their military and intelligence assets and in bases that are right next to populated areas, and then they're moving them from there and trying to hide them in luxury hotels and tower blocks. And by the way, have we seen any videos of those hotels actually collapsing into their footprint? I don't think so. I think we've seen actual guided missile hits on those hotels without the collapse of the actual entire building, which is what we see across Gaza, across Lebanon, previously across Iraq by the United States, in Syria, etc. Like it just goes on. And effectively what China and Russia are saying to a degree is, well, yeah, we kind of need you for the North-South trade corridor, and we need you for cheap oil. So hopefully the US will keep this. I mean, I'm being facetious, but I kind of mean what I'm saying, in the sense that it's of benefit to them for the US to keep sanctions on Iran because they get cheap oil. The same previously from Venezuela. They've lost it now because Trump has taken control of it, and they're going to have to pay market price, probably above market price, right? Previously, China was looting oil from Yemen and paying the Saudi incumbent proxy regime in the south. So none of the money was going to the Ansarullah government in Sana'a and in the north, right? So I don't understand why people want to project all of this altruism and philanthropy onto two countries that have no desire to be philanthropic to this region. Russia abandoned Syria. I've talked about this multiple times, but effectively what they're saying, the peoples of this region that have been oppressed for more than 100 years, have been colonized, have been bombed, have been absolutely disenfranchised, their voices completely eradicated from Western and even UN discourse, who now have an opportunity to take back their territory, to erase the Sykes-Picot lines that were drawn without their permission and without their acknowledgement, right? And actually take back the territory that belongs to them, the resources that belong to them. They're not allowed to do that because no, we don't want the conflict spreading. We don't actually want these people to actually regain their territory, regain their sovereignty, their self-determination. No, heaven above. Let's cite international law. We don't really mean it because we just abstain on a vote that violates international law, in my opinion, because they've effectively accepted a resolution that doesn't name Israel as the aggressor. So it's all this time trying to avoid the actual prosecution of Israel as the cancer in this region. And when people tell me, well, why on earth should they play along with international law? Why should they veto? International law is nothing. The UN is nothing. Well, why is China and Russia constantly ramming it down our throats then when they want to actually hit the West, right? And what
the UN doesn't mean anything, right? It's a useless entity, but but why do they always refer to it? And why does BRICS operate pretty much under the same auspices of the UN Charter?
Exactly. But this is the distortion of the discourse. Yeah. There's no logic to it. There's no rationale, and above all, there's no consistency. If you are genuinely anti-imperialist, you should, above all else, support the resistance and the movements of completely destroyed populations to restore their dignity, to restore their sovereignty, to restore their self-determination, and to regain their resources and their residual wealth, which has been drained from them, not only by the West, but also by Russia and China. That was a rant. Sorry.
No, I love your rant. You know, I went off about this a few days ago because it's so easy to go after Iran for bombing a hotel, okay? But it's the people who should know better are not sticking by them after a genocide, and they dare talk about international law after a genocide, after an ongoing, as this is still continuing, it's just expanding. And so for me, it was like we never got anything regarding what Israel and the United States have done towards Gaza, what the entire world has effectively, especially in the West. But with the slap on the wrist from China and Russia, if that, they were bombing civilians, killing children every single day. The entire world saw. And yet they have the audacity to stand there and condemn Iran for, even if Iran did actually go after civilians, even if Iran did everything they're accusing Iran of doing, it is nothing compared to the over 2 years of what has been happening to these people. So for me, it was even like, how do I even, it's almost like I feel like an idiot for even having to have this argument.
Exactly.
When people bring it up. It's like
I can't do it anymore. My brain is just exploding. You know, if they're adhering to international law, and we keep saying this, why can't they sanction Israel? Why can't they cease trade with Israel and the associated Gulf states? Of course they won't. But that would be the first step, wouldn't it? And what did they do to actually deter the war against Iran? What?
Nothing.
This is the whole point. Nothing. If they had actually threatened Israel with boycott, with international condemnation, maybe this war wouldn't have started. Maybe the genocide in Gaza could have been stopped. There's no guarantees of that, but it would at least have taken a stand in favor of some of the most vulnerable and disenfranchised peoples in the world today. And they didn't do it.
I honestly, I feel like the issue I've also had is with people's responses in defending China and Russia simultaneously, condemning, for example, the way they've condemned Venezuela and Delcy Rodriguez and the situations that, look, I don't agree with a lot of the decisions being made in Venezuela internally. I see it as a loss for Venezuela. I see it as a loss for anti-imperialism.
Huge.
To have to make these concessions with the United States. We know, and we've said it from the start, it never ends well for any country trying to make a deal with the United States, because they are a terrorist entity and they are manipulating things as such. But there was a few comments from some analysts on X, like about how, Venezuela is completely sold out, the Israeli flag will be raised, and how all of this and that. And I'm like, well, it's already raised in Russia and China, but you never see the same condemnation towards them that you would see against Venezuela, which is was an actual anti-imperialist government and an anti-imperialist nation for a long time, resisting sanctions, resisting U.S. Austerity measures, resisting the attacks by the entire international community, which called its leaders dictators. The same type of attacks that have been thrown on Iran, of course, then was bombed and its president kidnapped. But again, you have the audacity to excuse Russia and China, who have not just the flag of Israel raised, but the relationship with Israel is a transactional and vital one for both of them. So I don't understand. It's extremely opportunistic. It's extremely capitalist driven, and there's zero of this sort of collectivist, anti-imperialist approach that a lot of these people say they back. It's completely devoid of any of that,
and also devoid of the fact that if Iran and this region, the resistance factions and resistance states, not that there are many states left standing, Yemen is one of them. If they win this war on whatever level they consider to be a true victory, right, whether they economically destroy the United States and devastate Israel to the point where it can't recover, which I hope is what is going to happen. I mean, Hezbollah right now are fiercely fighting an invasion by Zionist forces in the south. They're talking about deploying 450 million against what? Like a few 100,000 maximum Hezbollah fighters. That's the fear that they hold of towards Hezbollah. But if this region succeeds, and there is huge optimism both here and within Iran, and I was speaking to Satara Sadiki just before we started talking, and she said she's receiving phone calls from friends in Cuba and Venezuela that are literally cheering on what Iran is doing, because for them, it also means freedom. So if people on social media are going to start dividing in this way, they're not anti-imperialist, because if you can't understand that this war is going to liberate every single one of the colonized countries eventually, then you're blind to what is actually happening. You're blind to the links between those countries. They're not disconnected. They're linked through their peoples, their ideology, and their vision of the future of mankind. And so therefore, right now, sort of undermining Iran or converting it into a victory of China and Russia, to me, it's Iranians that are dying in their droves. 42,000 residential structures destroyed until now across Iran. Schools, hospitals, ambulance stations, medics are all being targeted, just as we've seen elsewhere. And I've said that already, but it's like it's not sinking into these people. And even these people that are saying, oh, Iran's in on it and we're just heading towards some kind of CBDC dystopia. Like, shut up. Really, shut up, because I've had enough of this. Right. We need to have a conversation about the Iranian financial structure at some point, because it's just, it's so insane that these people can make these irresponsible statements that do huge damage to the resistance without the barest of research or even cultural investigation. Speak to people from the region, speak to people from Iran who will explain to you the agency that they have in Iran compared to the agency that people have in the West. It's extraordinary, the difference. We're living, or in the West, people are living under fascist totalitarian states that are entirely Epstein, Rothschild, Zionist captured. Iran isn't. They have interest-free, usury-free banking since 1983. So immediately after the Islamic Revolution, it was enshrined in law that none of the banks in the country can take interest on loans. None. Free healthcare, free education. Like, excuse me, how dare you actually project what is happening in the West onto Iran with so little understanding, so little desire to culturally understand a civilization that is 6,200 years old?
Well, because they can't wrap their head around a civilization that is 6,200 years old, because they come from 300-year-old civilizations. I mean, that's the thing. The issue I have with these people is they're looking at things from this giant top-down view, but they have no notion of the ground-up view. So they haven't been to these countries. They have no cultural notion, no historical background. So they just assume that when they read something, when they look at the money ties, and when they're looking at the interest of, for example, Agenda 2030, they assume that all major states, because all governments are corrupt, therefore Iran is corrupt. And so they go from this premise, and then everything else has to fit into this premise. And I have an issue with that, because even if you think all governments are corrupt, you need to find evidence for that. You can say all of them are corruptible, but you can't just assume that Iran's in on it. It's such a lazy argument to say that, oh, so-and-so is in on it, so-and-so is sold out. But give me the specifics as to why you think that is. Because from what I'm seeing, China and Russia are well in on Agenda 2030. And none of these, the people that criticize everyone, okay, but the people that want to just go after the most vulnerable, like, in the global South, like Venezuela or Iran, they always seem to seek to undermine those from the global majority, the global what's known as the global South, or the anti-imperialist sectors. And I see that as, in a way, a supremacist attitude towards the fact that they can't believe that people of Iran or people of these other areas could actually be smart enough to actually opt out of that, or would actually not, it's just a very supremacist attitude from my perspective.
I mean, to give you an indication, right, in every country that is adopting the Agenda 2030, the CBDC, the AI surveillance, digital age, all the rest of it, technocracy, they're infested by billionaires, right, including Russia, including China, by the way. Huge numbers. Of course, it's a huge population, but China especially. Look at the wealth of Putin, look at the wealth of the oligarchs around him who are advising him. But if you go to Iran, and bear in mind, I only just did a very quick AI search before we spoke, and I need to look deeper into it. But there are, even according to Western biased AI searches, there are no billionaires in Iran. None. Look at the house that Imam Khamenei was living in. It was the simplest apartment. Nothing opulent, nothing luxurious. The same with Imam Khamenei, sorry. And the only Iranian-linked billionaires, including Pierre Omidyar, by the way, that took me by surprise, but apparently he has Iranian roots, are those in diaspora. There's 4 or 5 in diaspora in the West infected by global capitalist Zionist ideology. Yeah. And by the way, they're still pygmy billionaires. I mean, they're still in the kind of like 5 billion. They're in the sub 10 billion billionaire class, right? Nothing compared to Putin or to the billionaires in China or to the billionaires in the US and so on.
I actually want to share something about the Russian billionaires, because this is actually a real thing, and this was brought to me by a Russian. So Russia has the highest number of billionaires since the war in Ukraine began. Okay, and it's like, this is in 2025 from Forbes, a record number 140 Russian billionaires with a combined fortune of 493 billion, close to pre-war highs. Okay, so here's the thing. The thing I actually want to say on this whole thing. When Putin went into power, he was selected to kind of take down the billionaire class. All right, he was supposed to be the one to take down the oligarchs, and he did get rid of a portion of the oligarchs. The problem is there's also a portion of the oligarchs that support him or that have benefited from his support. And specifically, the people with money in Russia are have Israeli ties. So in that context, when you see the billionaires' population rise, and then you see people say, oh, Russia's doing great, they're making money off oil, they were able to circumvent the sanctions, all of this is true. But from my experience in Russia and what I've been seeing as of lately in Russia, inflation has gone on an all-time high. The cost of living is, for example, because of the inflation, the cost of living is exuberant now. It's not much cheaper than, for example, in the United States anymore. And the status of living has dwindled because of that. The high interest rates on housing.
Yeah, interest rates are massive, aren't they? 40%?
Massive. And yeah, I mean, for example, if you want to buy a house, you end up paying 2 or 3 houses, like, because of the interest rates. So it makes it basically impossible for people to buy homes. It's making it impossible for people to own cars because the cars are double the price. Like a Toyota will cost you 30 grand or less in the United States. It'll cost you 60. And so it's just a lot of things that people are having a problem with. And now in Russia, there's going to be a protest soon, I think this coming weekend, against the censorship, because they're getting rid of Telegram, they're getting rid of all the VPNs, they're getting, and they're saying it's an effort to protect people from the propaganda, that it's an effort also against the war, which you can even understand. Okay, you're a country at war. Okay, you're getting drones, so they're clearly freaking out, and there's some of that, but it doesn't really protect anyone, because it just doesn't make any sense technologically if you actually read into it, how a VPN is gonna undermine your military capabilities. The military themselves use VPNs. The military themselves use Telegram. So there's a lot of pushback right now against that. And Russia doesn't need that right now. This is actually a very vulnerable time for Russia, because when you look at the fact that militarily, yes, they've advanced and they have the upper hand when it comes to Ukraine, the United States is dragging them between a back and forth of a resolution of an end to the war in Ukraine if they submit to their list of categories. And then you have a fifth columnist like Kirill Dmitriev, who is basically, the aim is to take him closer, Russia closer to the United States. So technically, Russia's actually in a much more vulnerable position than many are even talking about, because no matter what Russia does, it is not necessarily coming out winning out of all of this, because they've lost a lot of support. Like, people no longer support the war. They're tired. It's been 4 years and there's been no resolution. The economy is doing terrible right now. It's not doing well at all. People are unhappy with the censorship and being disconnected from the rest of the world. And they see China, a lot of people see China as the threat. because a lot of their resources are given to China, and they buy everything from China, just like the United States does. So they've made themselves vulnerable because they're not exporting much, but they're importing everything. And on top of that, you have the news that there's been more billionaires than ever, and there's so much oil, money made from oil. But where's this money going if the people aren't seeing it? Well, it's going to the oligarchs, or billionaires, as we call them in the United States.
Or it's going into the National Wealth Fund, which isn't necessarily going to trickle down, because they're basically just plugging a hole in the hemorrhaging, right? Because Trump at some point is effectively going to put the sanctions back on, because that's what Trump does, right? He doesn't do anything that is going to be a win for his opponent in whatever scenario, right? So, you know, they might be able to plug that leak in their entire kind of fiscal budgetary revenue. But ultimately, it's going to come apart again, because it has done historically. As I said, the Gulf states invested massively into Russia. And so therefore, Russia is largely dependent on the Gulf states to keep itself afloat financially, one could say. And that's another reason why, of course, they're defending the Gulf states against attack by Iran, despite the fact that the Gulf states are aligned with Israel. So it's such a dirty game, to be honest. And this is what I just don't understand. If anything, people should just be supporting Iran in what is going on and the regional resistance, because you're going to see the rise again of resistance in Iraq, even potentially in Syria. And Yemen's yet to come into the war. They're desperate to come in. They released a video, one of their military videos, I think yesterday or the day before, which is usually a precursor to them getting involved. And really, right now, that is what needs support, not all of this kind of dirty gaming that's going on between China, Russia, and the United States, because that is what's happening. They are maneuvering full position, and that includes with Israel. I mean, I've just read the statement, which makes it perfectly clear that China's going to maintain its pragmatic, balanced policy, which just means that they're going to do business with anyone and just keep out of any wars, because that doesn't serve their interests, which is fine. Nobody wants Iran or Russia to get, China or Russia to get involved in this war, but at least don't help the enemies of the resistance. And that's what we've always said.
But if you read social media, you would think that, you know, Russia and China are leading Iran's victory, and they're helping them so much. I mean, these accounts that get to post fake news all the time don't even get asked by me. I mean, now I'm seeing it more, but usually, you know, if we say something, where's your source? Why do you think this? But like this random anonymous account on X, just because they randomly somehow managed to get 1 million followers or whatever, they're not asked to provide any sort of evidence, and people just share it without thinking critically, like, where are you getting this information from? Right?
Yeah.
And
I mean,
it's
the Russian intelligence thing, nobody has been able to make sense of it to me. No. Based on the information that we've talked about. Like, why would they even be necessary to do it? And why would they do it? No one can answer it, but they keep pushing this idea.
They're doing it secretly, Vanessa, is what I'm getting. We didn't know that the United States was helping Ukraine, but now we know it's a secret. So they're doing the same thing. They're doing it secretly, Vanessa. We just don't know. You know, that they're playing 5D chess, and they're, in the end, you know, they're going to come out on Iran's side, and they're going to help them. That's not how the world works, guys. That's not what's going on. And you know, I just want to you know, close on a couple things here. There are differences between and Russia to how things are being pushed. From, for example, Sergei Lavrov and the foreign ministry, we're seeing more critical statements towards Israel in the United States. Lavrov just made a statement saying that the United States thought that this unprovoked aggression that they did towards Iran would subdue them in a day, right? And he's talking specifically about Trump's statements that he made that everything would be really quickly. He says, I believe these people now understand how mistaken they were, how misguided they were. And yeah, I mean, because Trump is actually backtracking a lot. He's kind of waffling back and forth. Whereas Kirill Dmitriev, as I mentioned earlier, Kirill Dmitriev is somebody that it just uses this to try to, for example, get at Zelensky, get at the EU, mentions that Trump told Zelensky to make a deal because Putin's willing to make a deal and that Zelensky is difficult. So clearly they're working, right? He was just in Miami, Kirill Dmitriev was. They're working on something with the United States. This is another added reason as to why they're not going to go after the United States or Israel, and they're going to defend the Gulf, and they're going to do what they need to do. They are acting on their own self-interest. Yes, that's the Kremlin. But I do see a difference between that and what Lavrov has been saying. And there does seem to be kind of like a fight for power in a way, or a fight for influence. And it does make me fearful that the Kirill Dmitrievs are winning in this one because they have Putin's ear. And if they didn't, he wouldn't be making these statements. He wouldn't be put
he wouldn't be
charge
of the negotiations between Kushner and Witkoff. I mean, John Helmer pointed that out. You know, he's literally approving of them. So he's saying, yeah, okay, you're green lighted. And to a large degree, from what I'm saying, Kirill Dmitriev is usurping Lavrov and the foreign ministry, because generally speaking, it would be Lavrov, it would be the foreign ministry that would be involved in such negotiations, not some kind of, you know, what is it, McKinsey Bank, Goldman Sachs protege that has come back in and gained power in Russia, right? So I'm sure, because I also wouldn't have a too large a degree of faith in Lavrov being anti-Israel, because I don't think he is. But I think what you're seeing is this friction, as you said, this conflict between the incoming fifth columnists, which are represented largely by Kirill Dmitriev, but probably also others. There's Belyakov, who established the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, who was Epstein's contact inside Russia, so has connections to Kirill Dmitriev. And of course, you know, everyone, and quite rightly, have said Putin never met Epstein. But now you have Kirill Dmitriev, although he personally didn't meet Epstein, he was working alongside Belyakov. I'm sure he has a foothold within the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. And so there are undercurrents here, and I'm quite sure that within the Kremlin and also from within the military, there is opposition to current policy coming out of the Kremlin. Absolutely. And so that's probably, you're going to see a discrepancy in the statements, basically.
Yeah. There's a lot more on that, where that came from, and I think we'll have to save it for next time. But I think we did manage to cover a lot of things with a lot of facts and a lot of statements. We were like, so I guess that was a little bit more of like, I don't know, we were a little bit more
fired up. I think.
There were rants for sure, but there's also a lot of things we're bringing up here, guys, with facts, with statements. I mean, these are not just our opinions, but also like we're backing it with a lot of the actual details and the data that's out there. So All right.
Okay, guys. Well, thank you for listening, and I hope it was helpful. It was certainly cathartic for Fee and I, because we've been kind of getting increasingly frustrated with some of or a lot of the messaging that is being promulgated on social media with reference to the aggression against Iran. I think I can only say, please stand in solidarity with the resistance in this region, with Iran, because genuinely, in my opinion, they are waging a war for humanity. And if the world is going to change, it's going to change as a result of this war that Iran is now fully living up to expectations and way beyond, in my opinion. Lebanon, the same. We're under attack here. Yemen, Iraq, the resistance factions there, even Syria. There's 70,000 Syrian Arab army in Iraq, 30,000 here that I'm sure are also itching to get involved and end Jolani's reign of terror inside Syria. And so please stand with those that are actually really fighting for humanity, not those that are ultimately, in my opinion, going to be just as exploitative as the West eventually, as they gain power, as they gain economic influence and capture. So please stand with those that really are protecting all of us, really, for the future, because this is where we can see a new world order coming in, and it's not the new world order that Israel and the United States and all of the Epstein cabal are envisaging.
Yep. Iran
So
is fighting
thanks.
evil.
Yep. Pure evil.
Pure evil. Yep. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Take care.